Hello, everyone. So today's topic is going to be about atheism and religious practice. And the main question we're going to sort of focus on today is the question of whether an atheist can rationally practice a religion, and if so, what might that look like? So here's a little bit of a roadmap. First, we're going to talk about the question, what is an atheist? Then we'll talk about the question, what does it mean to practice a religion? From there, I'll give some reasons to think that an atheist could rationally practice a religion, and then close with the question, could an atheist ever have faith? Okay, so let's start with the question, what is an atheist? This question, I think most philosophers would pretty much agree on the answer. I know there's more controversy about the definition in other spheres, but I'm going to go with sort of the classic philosophical definition. So before we jump into that, just a reminder about the nature of belief. And that's for every proposition or statement that you've considered, you can believe it, you can withhold belief on it, or you can disbelieve it. So I believe 1 + 1 = 2. I believe that it is 4:27 p.m. I withhold belief that I have an even number of hairs on my head, or that there's an even number of stars, or that a fair coin will land heads. And I disbelieve that 1 + 1 = 3, and I disbelieve that, I'm in Africa right now. I'm in Canada. Right. So every proposition we've considered, we can take one of these three attitudes towards it. So given sort of this very common framework that's very widely used to understand the nature of belief, an atheist is someone who disbelieves that God exists, or in other words, believes that God does not exist. So often when you disbelieve P, another way of putting that is that you believe not P. Those are often kind of seen as interchangeable. So an atheist disbelieves that God exists or believes God doesn't exist. But note that atheism is consistent with different levels of confidence about God's existence. So, it would probably be really weird if an atheist was very confident that God existed, but some atheists might only be, moderately confident that God exists. Maybe they're only 70 or 80% sure. Others might be closer to 90 or even 99% sure. But you can be an atheist and have differing levels of confidence about God's existence. Just because you're an atheist, that doesn't automatically imply there's a particular level of confidence that you would assign God's existence. But very importantly, being an atheist, it's about what beliefs you have. It's not about how confident you are. So being an atheist does not mean that you are 100% sure that God exists. And in the same way, most theists wouldn't say, 100% sure that God does not exist, in the same way that most theists, wouldn't be 100% sure that God does exist. And, I guess we can debate about whether maybe some atheists would say they're 100% sure and some theists would also. But I think more clearly, neither atheist nor theist should be this confident in their views. This is sort of a widely accepted principle among epistemologists that the things you should be 100% confident of are things like 1 + 1 = 2, or maybe the basic truths of logic or something. We shouldn't be 100% confident about really controversial things like whether God exists. And I think that's just sort of widely accepted. So, you shouldn't be 100% sure if you're an atheist that God does not exist. But I also think that most atheists probably are not 100% sure, in the same way that most theists are not 100% sure that God exists. Okay, so that's a little bit about what it means to be an atheist. Now let's talk about the question, what does it mean to practice a religion? And this brings us to a different attitude. So we were just talking about belief. Another attitude that epistemologists often talk about, but that's a different kind of thing, is acceptance. So when you accept a proposition, you act as if it's true. So one way of practicing a religion, and I think a very common way of doing this, is to accept that religion's true. So you act as if that religion's true. And, kind of given what we see in a lot of religions, here's some things this might look like practically speaking. You might pray, you might attend religious services, you might engage in certain kinds of religious rituals, you might participate in a religious community, you might do certain acts that are commanded by a religion, such as fasting or giving to the poor, and you might read religious texts. So practicing a religion involves accepting or acting as if that religion's true, and then there's at least some examples of concrete ways someone might practice a religion. So initially, you might think it's a little bit silly for an atheist to practice a religion. It's funny if you type into Google like things like belief in action or acting and believing, like you get all these like inspirational quotes with sunsets in the back that say stuff like this. If your actions don't reflect your beliefs, do you really believe? And, basically just saying you don't believe something if you're not willing to act on it. And that's actually, I think, maybe behind this initial thought. Look, if you believe something, it's kind of natural to think that you should act on that belief. An atheist, like we just talked about, is someone who believes that God does not exist. So why would an atheist accept that God exists? Why would you practice a religion if you don't believe that it's true? Beliefs and actions just shouldn't clash in this way. And so I think some people, this might be kind of their initial thought or their initial reaction to this question. Why would an atheist ever practice a religion if they believe that God does not exist? That just seems kind of silly. And then you might say, if they're practicing a religion, I don't even think they're an atheist anymore. Okay. So what's interesting is that as inspirational as maybe some of these quotes are, and I get that, like sometimes we are weak-willed and we need to really make sure our actions align with what we say we believe or what we say we want to do. I get that point of view, but I think at the same time, this is a little bit of a overly simplistic view of the nature of rational belief and rational action and how those fit together. And I think this kind of one way to put this point is it comes down to a point about the difference between belief and acceptance. Okay, so here's what I want to note on this. We accept things, we act on things that we don't believe, and we believe things that we don't accept. And so not only is this just a normal part of our lives all the time, I think it's also perfectly rational. So let's talk about some examples. Cases where you might accept that some statement or proposition is true, but you don't believe it. You might be walking around in the middle of winter with your children and they all want to go play on a frozen lake. And you might have very good evidence the lake is solid and be quite confident and believe that the lake is solid. But because it would be terrible if your children fell in the lake, you should accept that the lake is not solid and not take the risk of letting your kids go in because you're not 100% sure it's solid, and it's not worth just letting your kids go play on the ice just for fun when they could fall through and get very hurt or even die. Okay, so that's one case where you should accept that the lake is not solid, even though you believe the lake is solid. And a lot of cases where we kind of do something just in case, they would also fall in this category. So this picture I have on the screen, I expected 10 people to come, but I bought extra wine just in case more people show up. So you might believe 10 people will come, but accept that 15 people will come for the sake of acting. Just buy a little bit of extra wine. Let's say you're going to go out to a Halloween party. There's a 10% chance of rain and you have to walk there. And you just spent hours doing all your makeup and all your hair and you made your costume super cool. You might bring an umbrella and accept that it's going to rain just in case it rains to protect yourself from the rain, so your cool costume doesn't get messed up, even though you don't believe it will rain. Okay. And relatedly, I think these are just sort of the inverse cases. A lot of the cases sort of apply to both, but you can believe something and also not accept it, right? So you might believe that you're throwing a surprise party for your friend later today, but whenever you're around your friend, you're acting as if there's no party going on because that would ruin the surprise. So you believe there's a surprise party, you don't accept that there's a surprise party. Similarly, you might be a judge who has some inadmissible evidence about whether someone is guilty of a crime. And so you might have inadmissible evidence that they actually did commit this crime, but because that evidence is not legally allowed to be used in a court of law, you have to go ahead and call them innocent, even though you believe they are guilty. So you accept that they're innocent, but you believe they're guilty. So you have this belief they're guilty that you don't accept is true. Okay. So note that atheists are not 100% sure that God exists. And so a lot of these cases could apply. They could be cases of acceptance without belief. Cases where, because of the way that the stakes are or something, I'm going to give more concrete examples of this. It makes sense to go ahead and practice a religion because they're not 100% sure, and they shouldn't be 100% sure. And note also that atheists, they do disbelieve that God exists, but they could take other attitudes towards God's existence. So for example, you can believe God doesn't exist, but still hope that God exists, especially if you're not 100% sure that God does not exist. So there might be other attitudes that atheists take along with disbelieving that God exists that could make it rational for an atheist to accept God's existence. So to make those last 2 points a little bit more concrete, here's a couple examples of atheists who might rationally accept a religion. In other words, who might rationally act as if that religion is true, engage in the various religious practices we talked about, etc. Here's the hopeful atheist. The hopeful atheist says, I don't have enough evidence to believe that God exists. And in fact, I think the evidence supports that God doesn't exist, hence I'm an atheist. However, nonetheless, I hope that there's a powerful, good creator. And on that basis, on the basis of the hope, I practice a religion. The wagering atheist. So an atheist might say, look, I'm an atheist, but I know there's a chance I'm wrong. And how good would it be to make a commitment to God if God did exist? Knowing a being like God would be incredibly valuable. And if God existed, then engaging in these various religious practices or doing what this God want me to do would be very important things to do. And so because of that chance I'm wrong, I'm going to go ahead and commit to God or practice a religion. You could also imagine a trying it on atheist, right? So you might say, look, I don't believe that God exists, but I see there are many benefits to practicing a religion. And of course, I could be wrong about God's existence or about whether a certain religion is true. So I'm just going to try it. I'm going to try practicing a religion for a period of time. I'm going to see what kind of pieces of evidence I get out of that. I'm going to see what kind of, what the experiences of that are like. I'm just going to try it and see what happens. Okay, so I think those are all examples of plausible cases where someone might be an atheist, but rationally act as if a religion is true or rationally act as if God exists. This kind of brings us to our final question, a question I find very interesting, which is the question of whether an atheist could have faith. So my answer to this question is that it depends. This depends on what faith is. But I think there's two kinds of faith. The first is attitude-focused faith. And this is faith that's an attitude or a mental state. It's the thing in your head. So things that are in your heads are like beliefs or desires or emotions. And faith might, like one kind of faith is faith that's kind of like that. It's in your head. On many views, if you have attitude-focused faith, this is going to require a belief-like attitude, if not a belief, or something like a belief, and then a desire-like attitude. But by contrast, there's action-focused faith. And this is faith that is an action. It's a thing that you do. So when we say someone took a leap of faith, that might be what we mean, or that might be a way of describing action-focused faith. And actually taking a leap of faith is consistent with a lot of things going on in your head. On the one hand, if you're like leaping to, have someone catch you, you might believe they're going to catch you, but you might think, I really don't think they're going to catch me. I don't think that I have good evidence for that, but I have no choice right now. Otherwise, something terrible will happen or I'll die or something. And so you might just be taking a risk on them, even if you don't trust them or think they're going to catch you. So here's sort of my tentative suggestion, but I'm curious what you all think. Atheists cannot have attitude-focused faith because attitude-focused faith requires something belief-like, even if it's not a belief. But whatever that belief-like thing is, that's not consistent with being an atheist. But I think atheists could have action-focused faith. They could take a leap of faith. They could have faith, demonstrate faith in how they act. So the overall answer to the question, can an atheist have faith, is yes and no. They can have action-focused faith, but they cannot have attitude-focused faith. Okay, so just to review what we've covered today, atheists are people that disbelieve that God exists. Practicing a religion involves accepting it, acting as if it's true. We've then talked about some reasons to think that an atheist could rationally practice a religion, and some concrete examples of what that might look like. And then concluded that atheists could not have attitude-focused religious faith, but could perhaps have action-focused religious faith. So here's kind of a question to ponder, a related question to think about. Could it be rational for a theist to not accept God's existence, or someone who believes religion is true to not accept that religion is true? Would the same reasons we've talked about in this video apply to the theist not accepting God's existence, or is theism different for some reason? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.